Hello everyone! The second week of beta changes have been released and Arlecchino received a huge overhaul on how her kit plays. Second week beta updates usually have the biggest changes, but rarely has a character's overall playstyle and identity been changed as much as Arlecchino has with this week's update. Drastic changes can be pretty risky to a character's kit, but don't worry, despite seemingly popular opinion, in my opinion these are great changes for Arlecchino and pretty much an overall buff across the board, while also giving her actual gameplay much more complexity than originally, and clearly establishes her niche as a pyro DPS. I'll discuss exactly what updated about her kit and how it changes her playstyle, teams, builds, and overall strength. First, let's quickly summarize Arlecchino's original kit and core playstyle. Arlecchino is designed to be a normal attack oriented pyro carry. She gets infused and empowered normal attacks when she has Bond of Life. The damage scales off the amount of Bond of Life she has, and in order to get Bond of Life, you need to skill to apply a dot called Blood Debt onto enemies, and after waiting around 6 seconds, you charge attack to gain a lot of Bond of Life. Killing the enemies beforehand also achieves this. Other minor sources include her ultimate and her signature, so the overall gameplay included skilling on Arlecchino and ulting if you had it, switching to your supports, and then switching back to Arlecchino to charge attack, and now with all the Bond of Life, you could on field with her with all the supports set up already. You could really have described her as a modern melee Yoimiya, both in terms of playstyle and teams. So while the details of her kit were complex, the gameplay loop was fairly simple. With Arlecchino's newest changes, she is no longer just an updated Yoimiya. So what changed? I will show you the new descriptions with the changed information in green text color. First, her normal attack talent. The Bond of Life requirement for enhanced and infused normal attacks have been reduced from 30% to 20%. These normal attacks originally consumed 5.5% bond, then 4% bond allegedly, but now it consumes 6.5% of her current Bond of Life. In addition, the increased multiplier in her enhanced normal attacks have been buffed significantly. And most interestingly, her enhanced normal attack reduces the cooldown of her skill by 0.8 seconds, which will come into play when we consider her skill changes. Her skill no longer provides any healing. In addition, the mechanics have overall been simplified. Instead of Blood Debt having 3 stages, each 3 seconds long and having their own Bond of Life value, it has been simplified to 2 stages. Simply put, if you charge attack immediately, you'll get 40% bond, but if you wait 5 seconds for the Blood Debt to upgrade, you'll get 70% bond. The Blood Debt dot damage itself was slightly buffed. Also, we now know her skill grants 5 pyro particles on cast. However, the most important change is that the skill cooldown has doubled to 30 seconds. This seems to be a significant nerf, even if her enhanced normal attacks reduce its cooldown, but the last thing we need to consider is her ult changes. Her ult has the same nuke damage, but it no longer gives a small source of Bond of Life. Instead, the healing that used to be on her skill was moved here. It will heal off any Bond of Life, so basically resets Bond of Life to 0, and then heal based off 300% of her attack. Assuming she has 3000 attack, she'll heal about 9000 HP, which is fine. You will have to be careful about taking damage, however. And lastly, her ult resets the cooldown on her skill. The overall core mechanics for Arlecchino to deal damage have remained relatively the same. She's still normal attack oriented, she still does more damage based on Bond of Life, and she still gains most of her Bond of Life from charged attacking enemies with Blood Debt. However, the changes regarding her skill cooldown and it being reset on ult completely changes Arlecchino's gameplay identity. With the ability to skill twice during her rotation, her overall rotation time will be longer since there will be extra waiting time for her Blood Debt to charge up, but she can now gain a maximum total of 140% bond, offset a bit by larger bond consumption. Now you could do a similar setup as originally, where you could start with Arlecchino's skill, set up with supports, and then go back to Arlecchino with now longer on-field time. But with the skill reset, you could also split Arlecchino's on-field uptime, allowing for you to refresh support skills in the middle, similar to Alhaitham. For this reason, in my opinion, her core gameplay identity has switched from being melee Yoimiya to pyro Alhaitham. And I think the Alhaitham comparison in terms of Arlecchino's playstyle gives us the perfect way to visualize how Arlecchino will now be played. Now, if you don't play Alhaitham, I'll summarize him really quickly. So Alhaitham has sources of mirrors, either from his skill or his ult. If you use his skill or his ult when he has 0 mirrors, you will get 3 mirrors, which is the max, and 3 mirrors gives him the most damage from his normal attacks. If you use any of them while he already has mirrors, he just gains 1. So let's consider Alhaitham's spread team as an example. In this team, you'll set up with Yae, Fischl, and Nahida, then you'll switch to Alhaitham to probably burst to start his mirror combo, and then you have 2 choices. First, you can either normal attack to get the 2 procs of your 3 mirror procs, and then after you get those 2 procs, you can just scale to maintain longer uptime for your 3 mirrors, or you can split the uptime. So for example, you could burst, do your normal attacks to get 2 procs of your 3 mirrors, then after that, switch off of Alhaitham, go back to Nahida, Yae, Fischl, and reset the duration of their turrets and their skills. Then after that, go back on Alhaitham, skill, and then you'll have 3 mirrors again for 2 more procs. Now if we replace Alhaitham and Nahida with Arlecchino and Chevers, we get a very strong overload team that can be played in the exact same way. Similarly, you can set up all your support skills, and then when you switch back to Arlecchino, you can either use both of your skills immediately to extend one single on-field timing of Arlecchino, or you could split them up, which allows you to have time to reset the skills of your supports. So in summary, these are the two main ways you can play Arlecchino at this moment. You can do one longer uptime with Arlecchino, and I think this will be the more intuitive way to play her Vape teams. Very similar to original rotation. One thing I want to point out is that you may not want to wait 5 seconds for a second skill after having it reset with burst. You may just want to charge the attack immediately and just cash in the 40% bond instead of the 70% bond, just to not overextend the rotation and front load her damage more. The alternative rotation is splitting her uptime. This will likely be her best rotation in overload teams, as sub DPS characters like Vishu and Yai can greatly take advantage of refreshing their turret skills, and a split uptime rotation allows for this. Because of these new rotations, Arlecchino's actual gameplay has much more depth than before, which is great. Now the biggest thing coming from these new rotations is that it makes Arlecchino less Bennett-Reliant than she was before, which was one potential flaw of her previous kit. The reason this is the case is her increased rotation time. Previously, Bennett's attack buff could benefit Arlecchino entirely when she was on-fielding during a rotation, and without any inherent attack buffs, a lot of Arlecchino's theoretical damage in terms of teams relied on Bennett. With these changes, Arlecchino now has longer rotation time and can potentially split her uptime. In these scenarios, Bennett's buff does not buff the entirety of Arlecchino's damage when she's on-fielding and doing her normals. Does this make Bennett bad? No, he's still one of Arlecchino's best teammates. But this does close the damage gap between Arlecchino teams with and without Bennett, making her much less reliant on Bennett for optimal damage than originally, allowing for more comfort team options that don't just tank her damage. Now keep in mind, these are just my early thoughts on the rotations. It may very well be the case that Vape teams can utilize split uptime rotations, for instance. For more optimized rotations and specific normal attack combos, just wait and see for some theory crafters to cook something up, or wait till we get more gameplay footage. Now to address some popular concerns about Arlecchino's kit changes gameplay wise. One of the biggest concerns is her being burst reliant now, and combined with her long skill cooldown makes her worse to play. Now we'll see whether her feeling bad to play will be the case when she releases in game. In terms of burst reliance, yes, her burst is more important now. However, I think her reliance on her burst is being overstated. In my opinion, she's as burst reliant as Alhaitham is, and I personally don't consider Alhaitham to be that burst reliant, but just having two ways of activating his main damage, either with skill or with burst. And I think a big part of it is that in Alhaitham's teams, he gets his burst back very easily with little to no ER built, and this will be the same with Arlecchino. With her ultimate, she has two separate sources of getting her enhanced normals in split uptime rotations. And with the ability to skill twice and each skill giving 5 pyro particles, that's 10 pyro particles that Arlecchino will catch. That's a lot of energy, and combined with teammates such as Double Electro for Electro Resonance, she could potentially run no ER and still get her burst back up every rotation. Her skill cooldown is 30 seconds, but in a proper rotation, you should be able to get at least 50 normal attacks, which reduces the cooldown of the skill to around 18 seconds, the exact same cooldown as Alhaitham's skill. Now does she get screwed over against cringe enemies that disappear and she can't attack them? Yes, but I feel like that negatively affects most if not all characters in this game, and not really an Arlecchino specific thing. The other main concern is her survivability and lack of resistance to interruption. Survivability wise, she has 20% resistances, resulting in her taking 20% less damage, and the heal every time she ults. Both are nice. The healing is a bit worse than before if the 200 bond of life scaling was true, and with the extended rotation, you aren't healing Arlecchino as often as before. Personally, I think it'll be fine since she can easily dodge while normal attacking, but I can definitely see more casual players struggling in Abyss without shields. Speaking of shields, with her teams becoming less Bennett reliant, putting in shielders like Beidou won't be that much of a detriment damage wise and give you massive quality of life, which relieves her survivability and resistance to interruption issues. Now however, Hoyo has given us a fix to her resistance to interruption in her inherent kit, but it comes in the form of her new Constellation Changes, so let's cover them really quickly. C1 is the biggest change. Originally, it gave a chance to give her Bond of Life whenever she does enhanced normal attacks. Now, when she's under that enhanced Feast of the Crimson Death state, with C1, her enhanced normal attacks just gain more multiplier, 120%, and also with C1, she gains resistance to interruption. Now, this is exactly the same thing as Nivelette C1. Both gives resistance to interruption, and both give a massive damage bonus. They are both quite similar in strength, and to be honest, with this new C1, it is pretty much better than her signature if you're looking to which one you should pull strength wise. However, I just want to reiterate this: do not get baited by C1. This is just classic Hoyo fashion, making C1 seem very good. You don't need to pull C1 for Arlecchino to be good. She's fine at C0, and as you'll see with team building, there is more room to fit in shielders on her C0 team, so you don't necessarily need resistance to interruption. Now, if you want to optimize Arlecchino, vertically invest, C1 is very good. I would recommend it if you're planning to pull, but do not feel that you need C1 for her to perform. As for other constellations, just some slight text rewording and removing just to be consistent with Arlecchino's new skill and ultimate. So for example, Blood Dead no longer has 3 stages, so it just second stage. And in addition, C6 has been buffed, so that's cool. Now builds wise, nothing has really drastically changed. Her signature is still her best in slot, still looks cool with a scythe. Other 5-star options include Staff of Scarlet Sands, Homa, and Jadewing Spear. I would say Staff of Scarlet Sands shines a bit more in Vape teams and Jadewing Spin overall, Homa taking a little bit of a hit. As for non-5-star options, similar recommendations as before. Pole arms that are just stat sticks, such as both of the Battle Pass weapons that give crit, Dragon's Bane if you want a Vape, and a nice free to play option, White Tassel. Artifact set wise, again, her best in slot is the new one that is coming out specifically for her. You will want to farm that one because it is a decent bit better than what we currently have. While you're farming that domain, you can do 2-piece, 2-piece, you can do 4-piece Glad, which I would recommend, or you can do 4-piece Gilded if you're aiming for her being in a Vape team. 4-piece Crimson Witch is also a good placeholder. As for artifact stat wise, nothing has really changed. Attack Pyro Crit normally, EM Pyro Crit if you're vaping. However, one thing I will add is that you can consider an attack goblet instead of a pyro goblet, especially in Bennett-less teams. Of course, for specific answers, consult the optimizer, but do consider attack goblets can be viable. Substat priority is pretty much the same. As for energy recharge requirements, I think 120 to 130 is still fine, as I said initially. Extra energy recharge gives you that comfortability to ensure that she gets her ult every single rotation. However, you can probably knock this down 10%. Like I think 10% ER is fine, and even in some teams, just 0% ER build is perfectly fine. As for Arlecchino's team comps, the type of team options you can play haven't changed. You can still play Overload, Double Hydro Vape, VV Vape, Furina Vape, Overload Vape, and Mono-Pyro. However, the relative strength of each of those team archetypes have changed slightly with Arlecchino's kit overhaul. Mono-Pyro is pretty much the same, not her best team comp, but it still works. As for her various Vape teams, it gets quite complicated, and to be honest, it's too early to tell which exact Vape teams are better or not. For instance, I've seen early calculations from J-Stern showing VV Vape not doing that well anymore, but Double Hydro with Bennett performing very well. With Arlecchino's new rotations, it will take time for people to figure out the right order to use your support skills and to do some more team DPS calcs. What I can say with some confidence at the moment is that Vape is still strong despite longer rotations being usually less favorable for Vape teams. At the current moment, I am more confident recommending the normal double hydro teams with Xingqiu and Yalan, which gives damage reduction, resistance to interruption, and an extra slot you can fill with. For example, Zhongli for even more comfort, or Bennett for more damage. In terms of Furina Vape teams, again, they still have the flaws of less fanfare and less survivability because Arlecchino will be low HP from Furina's drain while on feeling. So in my opinion, it would be a better use of Furina in another team and not with Arlecchino. Arlecchino Furina teams are still fine though. I would personally recommend Arlecchino, Furina, Xingqiu, and an AoE healer like Jean, which covers team healing and resistance to interruption. You can also brute force the plunge playstyle with Shen Yun. And lastly, overload teams. I think overload teams got the biggest buff from these changes. With overall longer rotations, overload teams gain more than Vape does since buffs from Shevers last longer and are less front-loaded. In addition, as I mentioned before, with the ability to do split uptime rotations with Arlecchino, you can easily maintain turret uptime of characters like Yai and Fischl, similar to an Alhaitham spread team. On top of that, less Bennett-Reliance means you aren't forced to play Circle Impact. So I personally am most excited to play this team, the Yai Fischl version. If you want a shield, you can easily replace Yai with Beidou, and the team will be very good, and Beidou is not gimped from being solo Electro. And if you want potentially more team damage still, you can still play Bennett on this team. Here are some initial overload team DPS calcs made by J-Stern, a very reliable T-Seer in my opinion, just to help you visualize the potential power of overload teams, so go check them out. And with that, those are all of the changes to Arlecchino's kit. I know a lot of people will be wondering whether C0 Arlecchino is better than C0 Hu Tao or C0 Lini, and the truth of the matter is that this question, in my opinion, is no longer really relevant with Arlecchino's reworked kit. All 3 DPS characters now play drastically different and fulfill different team building niches, which I did predict in my initial analysis video on Arlecchino. Hu Tao is centered around Vape, Lini is centered around Mono-Pyro, and Arlecchino will likely be centered around Overload. Now this doesn't mean Overload are her absolute best teams that she can only play, or her Vape and Mono-Pyro teams are bad. Quite the contrary, Arlecchino works well in all 3 archetypes in my opinion, a quality that the other two Pyro DPSs don't really have. But the overall design in Arlecchino's kit in terms of longer rotations and split uptime seemed to lend herself towards overload with Chevres, and this may be reinforced in the future when they release more characters. Personally, I think Arlecchino's reworked kit is amazing. It gives her a more unique playstyle identity and complexity compared to the other Pyro DPSs, and pretty much gave her an overall buff across the board. Again, the simplest analogy I can give for Arlecchino's new kit is that before, she was a modern melee Yoimiya. Now she is a Pyro Alhaitham. I'm super excited for this. I think Alhaitham is one of the best main DPSs in the game, and his playstyle and his teams are extremely flexible and do a lot of damage. So I'm excited to see similar results when playing with Arlecchino. There is still one beta change remaining, so hopefully just some minor adjustments, Hoyo, nothing more drastic please. Hopefully this video was helpful to you guys. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to leave a comment, like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to continue to see similar analysis type videos of pre-release characters in Genshin, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.